Hi, my name is Michelle Goldberg, and I went to Europe with support from the Pulitzer Center to investigate the question of whether bans on buying sex work. It's a question that's increasingly salient both in Europe and North America, as more and more countries seem to be ready to follow what's sometimes called the Swedish model or the Nordic model of prostitution law. In 1999, Sweden passed a law that was considered kind of radical and unworkable at the time that banned the buying but not the selling of sex. So in Sweden, it's not illegal to be a prostitute, but it's illegal to patronize a prostitute. The idea behind it was to kind of show that society disapproved of prostitution, considered prostitution a form of violence against women, but they didn't want to ban it outright because that creates all sorts of negative repercussions for the women, mostly women and men who are in sex work. And so, 15 years later, there is a growing sense in Europe that full legalization, which was the model tried in other countries, most notably in the Netherlands, has failed to make life better for people in the sex industry. Trafficking has increased. The influence of organized crime has certainly not decreased. The welfare of people working in the sex trade has, by almost all accounts, gotten worse. Prices for sex have gone down. The prices that women pay to rent windows in Amsterdam's and the Netherlands' famous red light district window brothels, those prices have gone up. And so you see increasingly countries looking for a different model. A couple of years ago, Norway passed the Swedish model. Iceland has passed it. France is considering it. Ireland is considering it. There are some Labour politicians in the UK who want to make a push for it. Should there be a new government there? Canada's government has recently proposed it. And the European Parliament earlier this year passed a resolution calling on all member states to adopt it. And it has a lot to recommend it. But if you look at kind of the data from Sweden, there is a lot of evidence, both in terms of kind of rigorous studies and also just anecdotal evidence that prostitution has decreased in that country. Human trafficking seems to have decreased. Prices for sex have gone up, suggesting that there are fewer people, that there are kind of fewer providers, and also meaning that the people who are providers theoretically can make a better living, even though they probably have fewer clients because their clients are penalized. There's been not a single murder of a sex worker while at work since 1999, since the law was passed in Sweden, whereas there's been, many murders of sex workers in other countries where it's legalized. And yet at the same time, there's an argument against the law from sex workers and their advocates who say that it's had all sorts of perverse and unintended consequences, and even some intended consequences in increasing the stigma that they face, increasing social condemnation, which is not just a kind of social problem. It has all sorts of repercussions, from losing their children in child custody cases. The overly broad application of the anti-pimping statutes mean that landlords are terrified of anything that could be construed as profiting off prostitution. So there's a huge problem with people in the sex trade being evicted from their apartments. And so I wanted to kind of see, there's so many claims made about both models, kind of the Dutch model and the Swedish model. I wanted to see on the ground, given that this is a policy question with international repercussions, what was really going on, and which of these models really was working better for women. And what made the story so fascinating for me is that I really like it when you have a story that starts with an open question, and that where the kind of ideological lines are somewhat blurred, and the right answer isn't that easy to discern before you're reporting. And in some cases, like this one, isn't even that easy to discern after you're reporting, because what I really discovered is that a lot of things that people say about both models are true. All of the negative things that people say about the Dutch model in terms of the increase in trafficking, the decrease in the welfare of sex workers, that's all true. And a lot of things that people say about the Swedish model are also true. And so the question ultimately becomes an ideological one. It becomes, how much do you value personal freedom and the freedom of people to choose a life in the sex industry versus kind of broader social issues? Sweden is a very collectivist society, and people there talk a lot about this isn't about kind of the rights of individuals, it's about what kind of society we want to have. And part of what's fascinating to me is that in a lot of ways, Sweden has created the society that a lot of people like myself would want to have. It's the most egalitarian, social democratic society the world has ever known in a lot of places. But there's a degree of sort of personal autonomy and personal freedom that people have agreed to give up to make it that way. And the ban on buying sex is kind of embedded in a broader ethos of conformity and kind of willingness to subsume individual initiative to social norms. And so ultimately my conclusion is that, the Swedish model does work. The Swedish model works to reduce the number of people in prostitution. It works to reduce trafficking. It does all of those things at some cost to people who choose to be in the sex industry, who in some sense are the people that the law purports to want to help.